Okay, I'd like to welcome you all today. Thank you for coming. My name's John Iwasiak. I'm Principal Civil Engineer for the Public Works Department, and I am the Underground Utilities Fund Manager. And we have two underground utility assessment districts that are initiated by the City Council, one of them being the Chapala Street Underground Utility Assessment District, and the other one being the Eucalyptus Hill Road Underground Utility Assessment District. And so tonight's meeting will be focused on the Chapala Street Utility Assessment District. So again, I want to thank you all for coming. And the meeting is being recorded. It will be available for viewing by yourselves and others. And the site address will be santabarbara.ca.gov/engineering. So if you go to that address, then you'll be able to see this viewing and view it at a later time for those who are unable to make it tonight. So the purpose of the meeting is to review our final design, the draft final design. Last meeting we had on March 18th was to review the preliminary design, and we only had the Edison design at that time. Now we have the Verizon and Cox designs, their draft final, and we have some design issues to talk to the neighborhood about. So we'd like to get some feedback today, and we'd like to get your comments. And again, I'd like to hold your questions till the end so we can give you the information first and then get your comments. I want to apologize for the delay in returning to the neighborhood. There's been many activities that have transpired since a couple last few meetings. And two of the most significant ones, as you may know, are the T fire and the Jesusuta fire. And those have significantly delayed the designs. As you may recall, there were many structures and facilities burnt in those two major fires. And heroically, the utility companies have come in and restored power and utility services to the neighborhoods. And those are the primary reasons why it's taken this long to get from the preliminary design stage to the draft final design stage. So we apologize for that, but understandably that the utility companies have done some heroic work in our neighborhoods that needed their assistance. So I appreciate your patience and wanted you to be aware of that. So I'd like to introduce our panel here today, and Jim Britch, Facilities Maintenance Consultant for the city, is our utility coordinator. And many of you know Jim. Jim's been around the neighborhood, and he's available. He's our prime contact and available for questions. And at the end of the session, then we'll have Jim give out his phone number for all to have so that you can contact him. I'll let him say that in a minute. We'll go around the table first. Tom Wagner from Southern California Edison, Doug Schwartzberg from Cox Communications, Tom Solomon for Verizon, and Lisa Arroyo is the project engineer, city staff. And Lisa's done a great job in on all the information that you're going to see tonight, so we hope you'll appreciate her hard work on that too. So I was going to start by showing you the agenda and giving you the current project status. Get touched on that already. We weren't going to go into a lot of the background. I feel that if you'd like to see that, we've done a pretty good job of explaining that. You can see the March 18th meeting and get some good information on background and where the project has been towards the design stage. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more or refresh your memories on some of the process in the Underground Utility Assessment District process, then please refer back to the March 18th meeting. So the task at hand today is to review the draft final utility design. And the devil's in the details, in that when we look at the final design, we came upon some issues that we wanted to make the neighborhood aware of. And most of them have to do with underground termination locations. When utility lines are undergrounded, they do have to rise back up on an adjacent utility pole. We call them the riser pole, and Jim will elaborate on that a little bit more. And so there are some technical issues associated with that. There have to be what they call guy wires, the guy lines that anchor a pole back to the ground that support the overhead lines on the remaining balance of the overhead utilities that remain. So we'll inform you of those issues. We also want to make you aware of the above ground structures, and they're the preliminary locations, or they're the locations that are contemplated, and there is some flexibility, and the utility representatives here can let you know how much flexibility there may be if one of these structures is located near or adjacent to your property. And then we want to talk briefly about next steps. That includes street lights and assessment engineers report and next neighborhood meetings. I anticipate a few more neighborhood meetings after the new year, and so we want to talk to you and inform you of some of the next steps. But please be aware that we will plan on having additional follow-up meetings as appropriate, and your comments and feedback today would be greatly appreciated. We'd like it focused on the utility design so that we can make forward progress in finalizing the utility design, and that way the assessment engineer's report can become a draft final, and then we can meet on that as well. So anticipate several meetings in the new year and to making great progress, and one of our goals is to get to City Council in spring, summer, so in that time frame, to get back to the Council to discuss some of the final issues that are needed to take next steps. So with that, just a reminder that the city is facilitating the process. What the decisions that the neighborhood makes, we would honor that. And we realize that there likely will not be consensus in the neighborhood, but we want to facilitate a healthy environment by which that everyone can say what they would like to say and be heard without interruption, please, and that we would have, the city would be listening to all that want to comment, and we don't have a predetermined outcome of this. If the neighborhood decides that they would like to continue and have undergrounding as a neighborhood, we'd certainly honor that. If there was a voice in the community that had concerns regarding the project, we'd listen to that too. So the city is going to be all ears and listening to all. So again, our draft final plans, utility plans are prepared, and the utility companies are still continuing to prepare the cost estimates. And so I think we may have indicated what we believe to be a ballpark project cost estimate. And since we've given out numbers before, we have had the Cliff Drive undergrounding district project go into construction. And that project is very similar to this Chapala project in many ways. It's approximately the same length. It's about 6 city blocks. Each project is about 6 city blocks. And so we have updated our cost estimate for that project and looked at the issues associated with this project, the Chapala project, and we believe that they are comparable in order of magnitude of cost. And so the number that we have, the latest number that we have in as estimate is approximately $4.5 million for the 6 blocks. So they're and we'll be updating those cost estimates as the utility company cost estimates come to us, and we have the latest estimates that we have within our system with regards to what the contractors are bidding. And so we've had favorable bids on the Cliff Drive project, and we anticipate that we would be receiving favorable bids in this bid climate that we're in currently. And so we'll be doing a follow-up onto costing issues, and specifically when we get into the assessment engineer's report, where a final cost estimate will need to be determined for the assessment engineer to work out assessment proportions. Okay, so we'll be reviewing these designs with you and before the plans are finalized, and of course your neighborhood input is needed and appreciated. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim so that he can talk to you about the design issues, and we have some certain areas of the project specifically that we would like you to be aware of and that we will be asking you at the end of our presentation for your comment. Any questions to this point?
You were talking about $4.6 million at this point, and of course the project there's a long way to go. But how much is that individually? When and how are we going to find that out? And at that point, are we able to go forward with this project, or is it too late to go?
The question is that $4.5 million, what does that relate to the property owners? How can the property owners relate to that figure? And then how do we move forward with the project once we Could you restate that last part?
Well, it's actually just
Oh, if we will move forward, yeah. How do we determine how to move forward? That's a good question, and I can tell you that from one of previous underground utility assessment district, what we've used is a straw vote mechanism by which we take a pulse and see where the neighborhood's at. What we do is, well, after this meeting as well, we'll be sending out postcards with some information and specific questions of what to ask the entire neighborhood, so we get some feedback. Not everyone's able to come tonight for various reasons, and so it's important for us not only to get the input from the people who have attended today, but to get a response from the people who would like to send us a response to questions that we have. And so throughout the process, when we need to get information from the neighborhood, we'll be asking the entire neighborhood those questions, which are, is there still support for the project? The City Council has indicated that they will require a strong support. And this project has had a strong show of support in the initial petition stage of the project. And so we'll be continually talking to the neighborhood and seeking information from the neighborhood so that we can take the appropriate next steps. And so to get back to your original question of the cost and what does that mean? Well, if I just do simple math of $4.5 million over the 127-ish properties in the district, equates to about an average of about $35,000 a property, if that helps you at this stage. Now, there's a lot of plus and minus in there because the assessment engineer's report will be determining what the proportional special benefit is for each property. And so whether people have underground lines removed on only their front and maybe their corner property and may have underground lines that may exist yet on their side yard, those are all factors that the assessment engineer takes into account when they apply their assessment report. And keeping in mind that they have to follow the law in Proposition 218, which clearly states that they can only assess a property for the benefits that each property gets. So each property will be analyzed individually for their assessment. And we'll get into those levels of detail when we have those types of meetings. And we will have a separate meeting on the assessment engineer's report in the new year. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
One more little thing that is so important, and I know that these costs are for specifically what you are doing, but I think it's very important to also let the people know that that's just the beginning of the cost, because then each person has to tear up their yard and get the utilities to their own box at their home, correct? I mean, I think that's important to mention.
There's a comment that the $4.5 million cost does not include costs such as the private property owner's cost to underground their service lateral if it's not already undergrounded. And that is true, in that the cost that that we are indicating as a ballpark figure does not include costs associated with undergrounding a property owner's private service lateral. That would be their service line from their house or business to the street, to the main line. So that is correct. And it's a very good point in that there are other costs associated with the project other than the main line cost. Thank you for bringing that up.
And John, I think one other question she had was before the final vote, the decisive vote is taken, everybody will know exactly the cost that they're voting on, and it cannot be increased after that. That was one for initial, when we may take a straw vote to continue to proceed and to define the direction we're going to move in, but the final decisive vote that everybody would have to make, all costs will be on the table before then.
That's correct. And in our underground assessment district process, there are specific points in which we will inform the neighborhood as to when we need their input. And so the postcard survey, if you like, is information gathering, as opposed to when we will need to get your official ballot. You will definitely be made aware of that. You will definitely have the latest cost information that we can provide you. We may give you a survey postcard regarding estimated costs to determine if there's still very strong interest. And then once we bid the project and have definitive costs from a contractor, that is the step in the process by which we will then notify you that we'll be doing an official ballot. And you'll have all the financial information that we can provide you to determine whether you would like to vote for or against the project. That comes at the tail end of the process. So what we're talking about now is design issues. Today we'll be talking about design issues and next steps to gather information to continue down the process. So hopefully that helps you understand some of the process. And again, if you'd like to review the entire process, please refer back to that March 18th video. And we also have our packet online. So on that same engineering website, we also have the Underground Utility Assessment District information packet, which outlines all the steps in the process. I have a copy here, so anybody at the end of the meeting, if you'd like to have a look at it to see what it's like, I believe a copy was all mailed to you initially at the project onset, and we can certainly provide you an updated copy if necessary, or you can get it off the engineering website online. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim to begin our presentation on the underground utility draft final design issues.
Okay, thank you, John. And I also want to thank Tom Salmon, Doug Schwarzberg from Cox, and Tom Wagner from SCE for attending tonight, because what I'm going to represent to you is some issues that they have brought to my attention, and I'm going to try to represent those comprehensively and completely, but at the same time I'm going to ask them to interject statements if I am in any way being misleading or incorrect in what I present to you. One of the first things we want to look at is the things that control the design, or the things that control who is in the project and not in the project, to a large extent, is how we end the project, how we transition the project from underground to an overhead system. And this pole here is a representative of that. You can see the wires coming in from the right-hand side there, and they terminate at this pole, and then they're going to proceed in these gray conduits down the pole to transition to an underground system. The situation here is that they require a supporting guide. There's a tremendous amount of weight on these on the wiring structure here going back to the right-hand side of the screen. And they would slowly bend that pole and then eventually pull it and bend it over if we didn't have the guy wires coming off the other side offering essentially a counterbalance or a counter support to counteract the stresses being put on the pole by the wiring going in the other direction. Now, immediately, or where this is leading us, is we can see that in the house that is right behind us, we have a big tree. It looks like there's the community sidewalk, the public sidewalk, and then a sidewalk going back into that home. That can work because the wires at any place that someone would walk under them would be above head level. But if you can imagine if that were a driveway and you couldn't stretch these guy wires across the driveway, because then that residence would be extremely limited in what they could get in and out of the driveway, and without hitting those guy wires. So we have to, as we look at where we can terminate the project, we have to take considerable notice of what's around there and make sure that we could guide the pole effectively and use that then as a riser pole. And as the final bullet notes, not all utility poles can be used as risers, and we'll see some examples of that. And that's to a large extent what we're going to be discussing tonight, how these riser poles can be located. In the project, we have 6 areas of concern as depicted by the 6 stars and the location that correlates to each star down below. We're going to seek neighborhood input on stars number 1, 5, and 6, and as we come to those, we'll talk about them in detail about what the options are that we want to hear back from the neighborhood about. Those are primarily cost issues in those points. The stars 2, 3, and 4 represent areas where there's been difficulty with the riser poles, and specifically with the riser poles that the utilities have chosen as their first choice to use. When we had the assessment engineer walk the district with myself to give us a preliminary idea of what her assessment was going to be, or how she felt about it, she explained that in the 2, 3, and 4 positions, and also in the number 6 star, that the location of those riser poles would dramatically affect how many other neighbors we were bringing into the district. In other words, if someone that was outside the original district boundary was positively affected by where we put the riser pole, then they would receive a special benefit and would need to be brought into the district, or at least have a say in the district going forward or not. So what we've done in the case of 2, 3, and 4, we've gotten back together with our utility planners and looked at what alternatives are that would still be cost effective and at the same time provide a venue by which we wouldn't have to expand the district, or we wouldn't offer any benefits to someone in those areas that are outside the initial district and not involved with the initial petition and project. So with that, the next slide will show us what's going on at star number 1. And this is Mission and Chapala Street. And the understanding that the city obtained from the neighborhood when the petition and the boundary was submitted was that we wanted to start at Mission Street and have sort of a corridor. As soon as you cross Mission Street and hit Chapala, there would be no poles visible, and it would be this dramatic transition. We can look at that. We've looked at that. We can do that. But what we want to draw to your attention is that there's a cost difference in where that project starts on that end. And we believe that the cost difference is somewhere in the realm of $200,000. So we're more, again, the city is only a facilitator. We do what the neighborhood wants us to do in terms of design and implementation. But when we hit something like this, that's a major decision, we think that we need to come back to the neighborhood, explain that decision, and then get input from you all on what you want to do here. If you notice, then this view is taken from what would be the Chapala side, the neighborhood side of Mission Street, standing at Chapala and looking back across the way there. The first pole, that would be looking what I would say would be southeast, yes. If we consider that Chapala runs, if we follow Chapala clear downtown, eventually you're going to run into the ocean, and if you consider that to be a south-facing, we're going to look at Chapala going towards town as being south, and actually Mission going, then east, and Chapala going the other way north. It's more, the actual compass is cantered a little bit there, and it kind of points at a diagonal. That X over on the corner on the one pole that we're looking at. Yeah, and that almost shows us true north if you look at that, if you look at the way the X is placed on that. But that's exactly the position we're looking at. And we're going to call that, for just the sake of tonight's discussion, we're going to call that the south side of Mission Street. But probably more accurately, it's the southeast side. Now, that pole, it would be ideal in a perfect world that we would just come down and we would start at that pole and we would head up Mission Street. But if we go to the next slide, we can see that that presents an initial problem. And that is that if we were to eliminate all the wiring coming across Mission to the, what I'm going to call the north, or coming into the neighborhood, we would have no supporting structure for that pole, and eventually it would first lean and then move towards or break towards the pole adjacent to it that has all the transformers on it. Notice if you come right down from the the very top lines, you've got the 3 mast arms coming down. Okay, and then we've got the guy wires. The guy wires are actually going across there. They don't run down and terminate to the ground. They go across and terminate to the other pole. Yeah, I'll go ahead and use the mouse here so I can actually point this out. What I want to make you aware of in this case is that these are insulators, and that these wires here do not carry. I'm sorry. I'll get go back to a little more careful here. Excuse me. These wires do not carry any Cox, Verizon services, nor do they carry electricity. They're guy wires providing support for this pole to counterbalance the wires that are pulling it in this direction. If we eliminate the pole up the block that these wires attach to, we'd have to run guy wires then down to the ground and ultimately close the eastbound lane of Mission Street, which we can't do. So what does that tell us? That tells us we don't want to take this pole out, because look at all the wires going up and down Mission. We can't mess with that. We said, well, maybe then the next thing to do would be to go down the street and rise up on this pole. But Edison has a safety condition whereby you cannot rise on a pole that has transformers on it. So that would not work for us. Now, Mr. Wagner has said that, gosh, we could look at potentially moving these transformers down block to another pole, but anything we begin doing, moving things or changing this aerial configuration as it exists, adds significant cost to the project. And we also see that the further we go down the street here, the more trenching that we have. So if we wanted to start the project right at Mission Street, what we have been talking about doing is having to set yet another pole right here, approximately, that would allow us to transition from overhead to underground. And we would route these are Cox and Verizon communication lines here. They would come to that pole, and then they would transition to underground. And I believe some of the Edison circuits, there's already a conduit, and they can get across Mission. But essentially, we would have to set an additional pole here. And let's see. And so, again, we were looking at that from over here. And that's one alternative that we can do. The other suggestion that the utility companies came up with was that we have two poles that sit right here. And I'll show you a picture of those in just a moment. We're going to put a vault right behind that. And if we were to allow this transition to come, if we were to allow these overhead lines to come across Mission Street and hit these poles, and then go down these poles and begin the underground circuit, our initial estimate is that we could save the project about $200,000. Now, as John stated earlier, the city is not a proponent of doing it one way or the other. We're just trying to bring this to the neighborhood's attention that where we start this relative to Mission Street will have an effect on the cost, and we want the neighborhood to take that into consideration. If you strongly believe that it should start, and when you turn right on Mission, from State Street or left coming from the freeway, that you should immediately be in the district, then we can certainly do that. But we need to hear from the neighborhood and say, yes, we would prefer to incur the additional cost and have the poles located back over here, or we would be happy with having the pole, the circuit start right there. This is a, here we go, I'll get this. These are the two poles that I'm talking about that are in existence. They would see these are those supporting guy wires that face back. These are the Verizon and Cox communication lines coming into the neighborhood. You can see this pole already has significant an underground conduit here that allows Edison to rise up on it. That conduit would simply be, that would go to a vault, and we would just continue this undergrounding on down. But we would retain this pole to provide the support for that pole across Mission Street. And then we had thought we could either use this pole or set a replacement pole that would allow Cox and Verizon to transition to an underground circuit at this point. So the thing that we're looking for, the design criteria here that we're looking for from the neighborhood, is whether the neighborhood would be happy with utilizing these two poles that are actually on Chapala Street and within the district boundary, but modifying the district boundary to allow their inclusion, or does the neighborhood say, no, we want to start the other side of Mission, and the additional cost should not be is not significant enough to keep us from doing that. I'll look ahead here one more time. Okay, those poles, the black poles, then would remain, as we see here. And I think this is where I wanted to go next. This property then would probably be eliminated from the district. And by that I mean that the green line would be the new district boundary, and that this property would receive no benefit because they would still have wiring for most of the length of the property in the back here. This Mission Street, 33 or 34 West Mission, would still be in the district and receive a benefit because the entryway for this building is back here, and they would have the wires above their entryway would be removed, so they would have a benefit from that. Okay, and then we would come up, and then notice here we've also, in response, this is one we haven't corrected yet, but in response to the owner of this property, the undergrounding is going to stop at this pole, and this will be overhead circuit back here. And that's what came out of the last meeting we had, is that would be an overhead circuit to this pole. So we would come down, we'd be underground, we would go up to that pole, we'd rise up on that pole and continue to the back property line, allowing us to serve these properties in this way, the way they're currently served. And then everything from this point, again, we're saying north or northeast on Chapala Street would be undergrounded. So, again, we can come back to that with questions later on, but that's one of the things we want the neighborhood to consider. The second star, or second point, is the pole here on Padre Street. And we looked at a number of ways to do this. One way was to relocate the existing pole of 25 West Padre. In other words, that would say, well, this pole here, there's a driveway, so we can't guy it back here. So we can't use that pole as a riser pole. And a picture in just a moment will represent that. That means that we would have to move that pole over this way, place it here so that we could guy it back in this direction. And the utility companies were actually pretty adamant about not doing that. They said that, one, it would increase the district. The boundary would have to come over then and somehow include this property and potentially that property. And their stance on it was that it's not operating procedure for them to benefit one property by removing a pole, only to put that pole in front of another property. In other words, to benefit this property at the detriment of that property. So what we looked at was coming back the other direction. This is the pole that we're talking about. It's this ivy-colored pole. Ivy-covered pole. We'd have to remove that. But you can see that if we use that as the riser, transitioning the circuit in this way, we cannot guide back across this driveway. So we have to move that down far enough, and then we've got a tree in the way that prohibits moving it just a few feet. We'd have to move it down to this area and then be able to guide it back to this gentleman's detriment. And then that would also, there would be some, he would have to, he would have the pole in his front yard, and also he would be affected then by the utility district, and he was not one of the initial petitioners. So what the utility companies have come up with is we've said that we're going to use this pole, then as the riser pole, and we're going to rise up at 35 West Padre. Okay? And then the guy wires would be on the Chapala side of the existing driveway, and the guy wires would come back here. And the way that would change, the district boundary then would remain intact. This gentleman and potentially this gentleman would receive less of an assessment, or this property owner and this property owner would probably receive less of an assessment because they will be having this benefit of the wires being removed in front of their house, but they won't have wire removed for the complete property line on the Padre side. So that was our situation there, and again, that is caused by, or that is a result of the riser pole and the inability to guide this pole in the way that we originally thought that we could. Again, one more look at this. You can see the guy wire already exists here, and that then could be the riser pole. There would be opportunity if it was a big issue for the neighborhood. We could probably move this pole back to more into this location because we could still guide down here in this parkway. But the most cost-effective way to do it would simply be to use this pole as our riser pole and transition from there down in this fashion. Another place where we have a similar condition is with the Los Olivos at Chapala. And again, we have pictures of this, but if you can just imagine what we're looking at here. When the utility companies did their initial design, Mr. Wagner did his original SCE design, we were trying to decide, well, what pole to rise up on, and we finally determined that we would come clear down to here, that was the best place because of his design considerations to rise up. Now, the problem with that is, as the assessment engineer pointed out to me, is that we would be extending the district boundary to include 8 additional properties. That is to say, if this undergrounding circuit here in the purple line, if all this wiring was to be taken down, this person would benefit, this person would benefit, these 2 people would benefit, and then because there is a driveway or an alleyway that runs right here back to serving these 4 properties, these 4 properties would also benefit because the wiring above their driveway would be removed and their access would be improved in the case of a pole ever falling or wires coming down. So we looked at this very carefully, and we thought, gosh, what that means is if we use the existing utility design, we need to go out and involve these people in the project. We need to get them involved in the district and introduce them to this. And we didn't think that that would be, the neighborhood's intent. If the neighborhood wanted the district boundary to extend down there, they would have drawn the boundary in that way. So we reevaluated, and we said, well, what would happen if we went back and observed the existing boundary? And this picture here is standing, again, this is, let me go back one. This picture is taken standing about right here, looking in this direction, at these poles coming up here and at this property. You can see there, it's a little dark, but here are the poles that we were contemplating, rising on, and down here is the pole that is adjacent to this driveway. So, let's see. So, what we said was these two poles would come out, the blue poles would come out, this black pole would be used. That's a picture of it. And then, here's where I'm going. So what we decided to do in this case, to honor the initial petition, not extend the boundary, and to involve only the people that were initially involved in the project, is we were going to come back and not underground the circuit to here, but take this corner pole, move it to the back of this property, so it's right on this property line, and then transition to our overhead at this point. Simply like that. And that puts it right on the border of the property. Notice that drops out. All these people that were yellow initially with this pole being used are now no longer included in the assessment in the district, so we don't have to introduce anybody else to this. And yet we achieved what our goal was, which was to get the wires down on Chapala Street and to bring them back as far off Chapala as we reasonably can. One other thing I might note here is that this property across the way, the pole would again be placed about midway back in their property. The properties on this side are differently configured. So again, this property would have the utility lines removed in front of it and for a portion on the side of it. But again, its assessment may change because it now is having utility wires at the back of the property here. Let's see if we can see. And this is that same corner. Here's the wires going up ahead. Right here is where we're talking about putting this pole. We would set it right here, kind of in between these two, we're all on the property line, and then guy it back in this direction. And guy it back in this direction, and then this is the corner property on Chapala that's in the district. And they would have, this is their side view, but their front view, and they would receive as much benefit as we could give them by placing the pole here. But that would be the answer, to place it here so that we didn't involve these additional properties. Okay, and so this is the final one that we've made this decision on that we want to draw your attention to. This preliminary design was designed to go at the rear property line of this Chapala property here. It's right here. Now this property, they have a driveway right here, and then this is a lower area. In other words, their rear yard goes down here, and they have kind of a sunken garden, if you will, down here, garden area. And then this is a large apartment building just adjacent to them. And what we were told that if we placed the pole here and honored this district boundary, if we did this, then we would be bringing these two properties in because they have this benefit of the wires across the street from them being removed. So we looked at how we could resolve that without drawing additional properties in. And those would be the two properties that would be affected by this, based on the engineers, the assessment engineer's preliminary look at this and assessment. She said, if you do that, then you're going to have to involve these properties. So what we have now decided to do would be to move this pole and to install a new pole at this here, and it would be right across from this property line. So essentially the district boundary would come across like this and down. That would be where our new line would be. What that would mean is that this property would still receive the benefit of wires removed in front of their house and adjacent to their house. And by putting the pole here, again, we leave these two properties out. And when we look at this property, we believe that this sunken garden would be much less affected than a street-level garden area by having the pole located there. So we believe that this is the best result. The black indicates a pole that would be installed. The blue indicate all the poles that would be coming out, and the only change we've made is to come from this location where the purple line comes down to here. We've changed that and now only come this far off of Chapala Street, across from this property line. And again, the reason for that is so that we don't involve these two properties. So there are 3 changes that we have made to, again, honor the neighborhood's initial boundary and the initial people that signed the petition, what was discussed, and what was presented to them. And so these 3 changes are the most reasonable way we can come up with to handle these adverse situations of involving more properties. And here again is Pueblo at Chapala. Okay.
Have a picture, Jim, of that last property of 2205, where you want to put that pole, that ground, your car park there?
You know,
Their entry.
their entryway is, they have a driveway that comes here, and they have a driveway that comes here. We'd probably put it right behind that driveway. I don't have a picture of that. We'd put it right behind this driveway, and then what they do is they come into the back of their house and park here, and then, again, this is a garden area, but their primary entryway from the street is their Chapala Street edges, so they're going to enter from Chapala Street. So this would be on their side property, and again, it would be essentially as far to the rear of their property as we could get without involving this person. And I apologize, you may have to go by there. Again, this is Pueblo and Chapala. You could go by there and take a look at what we're doing, but I do not have a picture of that standing here and looking in this direction. Okay.
That property is not one of you involved?
You know, that's a valid point. And what we've done here is what we've assumed is that when the boundary was set by the neighborhood, we assumed that was, that's what was given to the city, is saying this is the boundary. So we've made these decisions to a large extent on the criteria of don't extend the boundary, don't make it bigger. How can you make this work and be cost effective as possible without making the boundary bigger? And sometimes, understand that it's not always a win-win situation. In fact, it's something we have to compromise with this in order to do this. If the neighborhood wanted to go back and approach those people and talk to them about this design change, reference this meeting, have them look at it, and see if they wanted to be involved, then the designers and the city would certainly honor that neighborhood request, you see. But what we're saying is, our criteria is how can we make it work with the direction that the neighborhood has given us. But by no means is it. It's possible, and what you balance there is the additional cost to underground. Oh, I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. The additional cost to underground, the cost to install this pole, counterbalanced by the additional cost to underground this additional, 100, 150 feet, and rise up on this pole. The cost difference would be we'd have less undergrounding, trench to pay for, but we would have an additional pole going in here. And again, let me state this again. If the people in any of these residences are watching this at home on TV or present in the audience, this is not on TV. It's not a live broadcast. But if they look at this on the web, or if they're in the audience tonight, what we're looking at here is we're saying, how can we make this work given what you've given us? And again, if the neighborhood feels strongly about any one of these design criteria points and say, we'll go out and talk to those people, we'll do the legwork on this, and come back to you with some more signatures on a petition or evidence that these people want to be involved, we'll certainly honor that. We only facilitate what the neighborhood wants. So. Yes?
Pointing out that if these people wanted to be involved, they'd have to know what would the additional cost be to do the trenching.
That's true.
Breaks even, well, who cares?
Yeah.
But if there's $100,000 savings, maybe it's worth approaching.
And the savings would not be, that significant. And for that, but I understand what you're saying. And, that's one of the places that we're constantly caught. If you've ever done, added an addition to your home or done anything, a remodel to your home, you get the contractor there, we come in the city and say, how much is this going to cost us? Well, we don't know. Do you want granite or Formica on the countertops? Do you want the pole here or there? And then when we refine these design issues, then our planners can look at this and say, okay, the cost to do this is this much, and the cost to do that is that much. That's why they came to us and said pretty explicitly that the neighborhood's desire to cross Mission Street was a cost of approximately $200,000. They're willing to do that. That's not a problem in terms of how we design it. But we feel as a conscientious facilitator our role is to, when we have something like that, a big thing like that, is to bring that back to you, the neighborhood, and ask for your input on it. So in this case, I would say that this would probably be almost a break-even scenario. I'm going out on a limb a little bit there, and if Mr. Wagner or anybody else has any information on that, but I would say it's, the additional trenching to rise up on this pole is probably going to about balance the cost of locating the new pole there. Let's work on because, as I indicated, the points that we just did, 2, 3, and 4, we have pretty much made these decisions based on what is the most reasonable thing to do given what the neighborhood has given us. And we think that these make a lot of sense, but again, if somebody was a proponent for expanding this boundary, then we would be more than ready to listen to that argument and to allow that person or people to go out and involve additional members of the neighborhood. The next one, though, this is Pueblo and Chapala looking back, but I wanted to go over here to the 5th of our 6 points, Quito at De La Vina. Now, again, you can see the black line there indicates what the neighborhood has drawn, all right? That's what they said would be the ideal boundary for this, that we wanted to include all of Quinto Street. But we run into a problem with this pole on the corner. The undergrounding is designed here, and it's designed to come up. This pole would be removed. It would go to a little vault there. But when we start talking about removing this pole, because of the Verizon and Cox circuitry on it, we run into a significant problem, and I'm going to show you why that exists. There is a picture of Quinto and De La Vina Street. Okay, I may have said Chapala previously, but I meant Quinto and De La Vina. This is the pole that we're asking the neighborhood to have input on, whether we can leave that pole or not. The way the boundary was initially drawn, the neighborhood wanted us to extend the circuit to take these wires down and extend the undergrounding across De La Vina Street. But notice what effect that would have. We have these wires that are running up and down De La Vina. These are Cox circuitry and Verizon circuitry that run up and down De La Vina. If this pole were to go away, those wires would have to be relocated somehow to the other side of the street, come down this side of the street, and then cross back over. That would be one possible design. We'd also, if we took that pole out, these wires that come across De La Vina to serve the other side of De La Vina, Quinto on the other side, would have to go underground. We can't use this pole as a riser pole because we have the same issue that we had at Mission and Chapala, i.e. we can't use guy wires that extend back out into the one lane of Chapala traffic. So and then there's a big driveway here, so we've got to move this pole further up Quinto. We've got to relocate all this circuitry, come across De La Vina, down De La Vina, and then back across. We have to put a new street light up, all because we're taking the one pole at the very boundary, the very corner of the district out. And what we're asking the neighborhood to consider is that if we used this pole as a riser pole and put guy wires, we'd take these wires down back here, and we would guy that pole back down to approximately where this white Chevy pickup is setting, maybe even a little closer here, but we would guy up from that direction to support the pole. We could leave these wires in place. We could leave these wires in place. We wouldn't have to relocate this pole to allow it to act as a riser pole, and we would not have to trench across De La Vina Street. Our rough estimate of the cost associated with this portion of the project would be about $100,000 to take that one pole out. In other words, to do all the things that I just explained to you would add $100,000 to the project, or would cost approximately $100,000. And our concern, again, as facilitators is that good, bad, we are indifferent. We want to do what the neighborhood wants to do. The question we're asking is the removal of that pole worth an additional $100,000 to $120,000 to do all the things that we talked about. And that's a decision we're going to let you give us some input on when we finish this and look at a couple of the other, one more remaining scenario. Let's see if I'm going here. We're still at Quinto and De La Vina. And then this talks about the alternative design, rise up on the corner pole and extend the guide towards Chapala. That's where I talked about going back from this pole, leaving it and going back here. Notice Lisa has now made it black so it remains. We'd go back here. These poles would all come out, okay? And the guy wire would be in the right-of-way adjacent to, this is 2500 De La Vina. The guy wire would be adjacent to that. And there's our estimated cost difference to use that pole as opposed to bringing all the circuitry over and relocating these poles. This would retain the same boundary, which is a good point. Notice that what you have here is that this pole would be right on the corner here. This property, by letting that pole remain, the benefit they would receive is that their assessment would be less because these wires in front of the property would not be being removed, and they would have that pole remaining at the corner of their property. Obviously, their assessment would be for these lines and these lines if we took that pole out and moved everything across the street. And again, that assessment, given the fact that those wires would simply move 40 feet across the street, they would receive an assessment, but it may not really be worth it to them to just have them displaced by that small amount. But again, I'm hoping that the property owner at 2500 De La Vina is made aware of this. That again, we've sent them letters. We'll also send a letter out to that advertises or a postcard that advertises this website that John has given you earlier. And we hope that people go online, and if that's a major issue for them, they need to let their neighbors know that, and they need to let the city know that, and we'll come back to you and look at this option. Because it's technically possible, it's just expensive. Here's the final area we want to look at, and this, I would have to say, was our most problematic area. And there are numerous questions that came up here when the assessment engineer looked at this. And that have come up subsequently in our discussions with our distinguished planners. We have wrestled with this one, quite frankly, and it's pretty complex. But I'm going to run through it with the help of Lisa's wonderful PowerPoint here. And we're going to look at 3 different issues of how we had currently designed this to honor the boundary. And we're going to look at alternatives, what the effect of this would be, and then alternatives that we're going to have for you. This is another one of those points, like Mission and Chapala, like Quinto and De La Vina. This issue here at Constance and De La Vina, we're just saying, here's what happens. Please tell us what to do. The riser poles are showing these black poles that have the crosshatch in them, okay? And what the assessment engineer is looking at is she's saying, if this underground circuit, evidenced by the purple line, is put into effect, then what is the special benefit? And she believes that the benefit would be extended to the condos and apartments as shown. Let's see if I can see that here. The condos and apartments as shown. In other words, the assessment engineer has told us that if we move the underground circuit down to here, and the reason we did that was to avoid, we couldn't put a pole right here because we couldn't guy into this driveway. We had to go down far enough that we could guy back and still miss this driveway. What the assessment engineer, and again, this is a professional engineer, that this is what she does. What she does for a living, she's probably the most, at least the most well-known assessment engineer in the state, works all over the state. And when she comes into this, she's looking at this totally from a subjective viewpoint. She's just saying, I don't know if the mayor lives here or not, And she said, I don't want to know because when I look at this, I want to look at it totally subjectively. But what she's told us is that, look, if you do what you're planning here, then this driveway will have no wires above it, and this corner of this condo property will have no wires above it. There will be some assessment to these condo property owners, and this whole yellow, 33 condos, each with a separate owner, not one owner that we can deal with, each with a separate owner, would have to be brought into the system. Also, the benefit that's achieved by undergrounding all these wires here would affect various addresses of up to 43 condos. Some of these condos here would receive a benefit because these wiring across the street was being taken out. And specifically, this corner condo, because the wiring that currently runs here would be removed, they would have received a special benefit, and she would insist on including them in the discussions, the vote, and ultimately sharing the cost of this with us. And then finally, we see these apartments, which are, it's one owner, but it's, we don't know how many apartments are in there. But the driveway to this apartment building is right here. And if we bring the underground circuit, as the purple line indicates here, down to this riser pole, okay, it will clear the wires in front of these apartments, clear the wire in front of their driveway, and she's indicated that that would provide a benefit for them, that and the removal of this wire, and that they would have to be involved. So, needless to say, this came as a little bit of a revelation, a little bit of a shock to us, because suddenly now we're looking at a 120 some original signees. Suddenly we're looking at going and talking to 76 more people about getting involved with this. So we thought to ourselves, we said, well, that's a battle that would have to be fought if the neighborhood insists that yes, this is what we want to do, and we need to go talk to these people or these people or these people and convince them that it's right for them also. But we took an alternate approach that said, what can we do to alleviate this condition? And again, remember, this is not always, this is like a win, win compromise. It's not a win-win. It's not, everybody isn't going to win here. But here's a couple things that we've looked at doing with the with the planners. The first one here is this pole that would involve these condos. And what we've looked at doing is moving that back to somewhere in this area. Now, I know that these two properties are proponents of the project. I know that these wires have been a concern to them. But again, in order to keep these condos out of it, we can't use this existing pole because we can't guide back. The strain is going to be towards State Street, and we can't guide this back into the driveway. So here, we've got to find a location either in front of this property that we can place the pole and guide it back, or this is a garage for this corner property. We'd have to come even further back into here so that we don't guy into their driveway. So what we're saying is this pole needs to be moved back, location to be determined, but somewhere in this area here. And the reason for that would be to not involve these people and then to have less of an involvement with these people here. This is the property in question, that corner. If you look at this pole, now let me make sure I have this correct. Yes. This pole here sits right at the corner of the condo project, and here's the driveway that goes into their project that I had mentioned. Okay? There's one on either side of that pole. And if we set another pole down here by this white car and guide it back in this direction, we would be clearing the entrance to that driveway with the riser pole and then providing that access benefit to the condominium owners. This property here, again, a proponent of the project, if we brought this, if we said, okay, we can't rise on that pole because we can't guide it down into that property's driveway, we have to then bring this back to like this area, which puts it pretty much in front of their picture window. Not a desirable situation. We could bring that pole all the way back, take that one, or leave that pole as it is, and use this pole as a riser pole, okay? But again, now we have problems with this driveway access here, okay? We could come all the way back across that driveway to here, or even back to here. But the point is that if we go this direction as we had originally planned, we involve the condos. And we're looking for a way to step that back to keep the condos out of it and make it still the most appealing as possible to these property owners. We're open to discussion on that. We're open to input on that. I suppose, we could look at using this pole as a riser pole, or probably more feasibly would be to come back maybe behind this driveway and relocate that pole over to this side of the driveway. But again, we're sort of saying here, here's the problem, here's the only solution we can come up with, but we're going to look for your input to help us with this on what we should do as a final solution. Notice also, because I'm going to it next, that this pole would be being removed in any case, no matter what we do with the project. We're going to turn the corner here, and we're going to underground to some point in this sector here. We're going to remove that pole, which means that these wires and cabling going across to this condo complex that's on this corner over here would benefit. Okay, and that's the circuit here and the way it benefits these people. Yes?
Street light right there. Now, when that pole gets removed and all those wires are gone, what then do you put up? You put up a new pole in for a street light?
Well, again, John's going to talk about streetlights a little bit later, but yes, we put up a new pole that is fed underground and has nothing on it but a street light. And one of the things I know a number of the neighbors have opinions about what kind of street light should go up, and John's going to show you a little bit later on a couple of the possibilities. But to answer your question specifically, sir, yes, we would put a pole up on that corner that would have a street light on it, but no wiring to it, and it would be fed underground. And that would be the case on each of these blocks as we take a corner pole down, all the way down the street. On every corner except American Avenue, I believe, there's a street light. And we would have to replace all those street lights with a new standalone street light with no wires to it. Yes?
Why do you not want to involve other 33 condo units?
Well, that's a good question. Let me restate that for the viewers at home. The question was, why do we not want to include these 33 condo units? Let me state that the city is not opposed to that, as we are not opposed to the neighborhood spending $200,000 at Mission and Chapala. We're neutral on that. We're only bringing that to your attention to help us with the decision on what to do, given that circumstance. Our concern was that we would suddenly you would have to go ahead, you would have 33 additional people up here. And again, we don't know if there's another parking access or if this is the sole parking access, and these are all garages here for all those condos, where you'd have to involve only all 33 of them, or whether 15 people park there and you'd only have to involve. But what you have to do is go up and convince them that they were going to have a vote in whether or not the assessment district was established or not, and that it would be in their best interest to have it established and to pay money towards its establishment. And we believe that it would be potentially a hard sell. Now, maybe everybody in there is, scared to death of electromagnetic radiation and, would love to have this happen. We don't know. We don't know. But we think it's a big enough issue that we're bringing it back to the neighborhood for you to tell us. The same as with the other poles that are significant costs. Okay? If the neighborhood comes back to us and says, no, we want to go with what we originally said, we'll approach these people and talk to them about this. And get signatures on petitions that they're in agreement with it, they want to go ahead with it, we would be very receptive to that. But if we suddenly included these people without consulting the neighborhood, now even if you had 80% of the 100 and some people over here voting for it and all these people voted against it, the project would not get off the ground because of this one little sector area when, in fact, everybody else on Chapala was for it. So again, understand that as a facilitator, we believe that our job is only to bring situations to the neighborhood that are of significant concern or cost, and then look for guidance from you on how to proceed given those realities. Okay. Here, the assessment engineer, the assessment engineer, based on Proposition 218, has to provide an assessment to everybody who obtains a special benefit from the project. Okay? And her opinion in walking this, it's not. In fact, she has indicated to us that the only way you could do that would be for the neighbors to have a separate agreement with these people saying, we will pay your share. Okay? But they would still have to be involved. And remember, when we take the final vote, everybody has a vote that is weighted, according to Proposition 218, that is weighted proportional to the amount that they're going to be assessed. So if they were being assessed a half a point, each condo owner, then that may drop that down to 16 votes. But again, the assessment engineer says we have to involve them. We can't give them a freebie. She has to assess them. Any side deals you work out is between the neighborhood, but when she sends the assessment out, they will have an assessment against their property. And again, let me restate, I know the assessment engineer is a tricky business. And even though we've looked at it in numerous neighborhoods now, Forello, Eucalyptus, and now beginning to look at it in Chapala, there are nuances to it that are not always apparent to us, and that's why we felt that in representing this, we wanted to go to the very best, the best assessment engineer that we knew of, and that we retained her to look at this because of the number of properties and because of her expertise, and being able to work with us to identify beforehand problems like this that were coming up, so we could come back to the neighborhood and say, this looks like it could be a situation. Let's deal with it. Here again is that corner property. We're just about done with this. I appreciate your patience so far. I want to look now at what happens. Let me see the next slide. So in other words, we are not increasing the boundary. Lisa has magically removed the yellow that would indicate that these would be involved, and the green line indicates how we would properly reconstruct the boundary situation. Now, whether 27 West Constance would be involved in the project at all would be based on the neighborhood's ultimate decision of where to locate this riser pole. Okay, but that would be the effect of this situation of clearing up this driveway. The other option would be, and let me go back to this, you see, as we have it now, these properties are also obtaining a benefit from these wires being removed and specifically from these corner wires being removed. So the view from the balconies of these front condos here is going to be dramatically improved looking down in this direction if the situation occurs the way it does. So this pole is existing. We were going to go down to it with this additional trenching. We were going to go down to this pole and underground the circuit there to conform to what the neighborhood's original desires were. But because we were going to include these condos, we're looking now at installing a new riser pole at the corner of Constance and Chapala. And the benefit from that would be that with that pole there, these wires, there would be no wires going towards State Street from that pole, but these wires from across here would rise up on that pole and would continue down the side here. And what we believe that's going to do is that's going to eliminate then these 43 condos or some portion of these condos from any kind of benefit. We believe that the assessment engineer would say that depending on where this pole was located, the undergrounding on this side of the street would not provide significant special benefit because they had these wires here and they had wires from this point on. So that's an idea, again, and that's the accurate statement here. This is an idea that we've had, that we've come up with as to how to minimize the impact on these condos in terms of including them in the district. The next year we have a picture of those condos. These are the condos here. And again, what the assessment engineer is saying is if we go down to this pole as the riser pole down here on the corner, that they would benefit from these views. All these wires would be removed. These wires in front of this side would be removed. That they should share the cost because their property values, their curb appeal would be going up, and that she would have to assess them. Okay, we've got one final situation to look at, and again, by moving the pole here, we believe that eliminates this corner sector. In fact, to be more accurate, by moving this pole here and bringing this pole back, we believe that eliminates this sector of the condos. If the neighborhood decided to stay with this riser pole and this riser pole, then we'd have to be prepared to talk to these people and to these people about being included in the cost assessment. Finally, we're looking down here at this pole. I'll go back. You can see this is where this pole was initially designed to come out. This pole, in coordination with or in compliance with the neighborhood's expressed desire, was going to stay and be the riser pole. The assessment engineer told us that because we were moving all these wires, and specifically the wires that would go across, that are across this driveway and could potentially fall and block access to that driveway in a major earthquake or some other disaster, huge windstorm or something, that because those wires would be removed, they would obtain a benefit, a specific benefit, in that they would have an enhanced access into and out of their property, into and out of their apartments. So we looked at how we could counter that. Again, one option would be to say that's what we want to do, and we're going to go over and talk to this property owner of these apartments and see if we can get him on board with this. That would be a solution. If the neighborhood decides, no, we don't want to do that, we don't want to increase this in any way, The other solution would be to use this pole as the riser pole. And this pole rides on the pole at 2535 Chapala. We believe that is in significant compliance with what the neighborhood's desire was, which was to create this sector along Chapala of a pole and utility wire-free sector of street. It doesn't offer as much benefit to this property, 2535 Chapala, as if it came clear to the back of their property. But the net result is that these properties become removed. And here's a picture of that. This is looking back. This is the property we're looking at. It looks as though there's this property and then this retaining wall or this fence, if you will. It actually really doesn't retain dirt. I think it's more of a privacy fence with these nice tile in it. That extends all the way down here. That extends all the way down and past. So we were going to go clear down, if not to this pole, well, to this pole, and underground all the way up to honor this boundary. Now what we would do is turn the corner and go down to this pole and rise on this pole. And that puts us in front of this driveway over here that comes out so that these people would not receive a special benefit. And again, there would be a little benefit in the fact that this wiring would be removed, but the wiring at the corner here where the other pole we talked about would continue, as with the wiring from there. Okay, and then what that does, in moving that pole, it removes them from the assessment. And so in doing this, the design issues that we've discussed with you and our proposed solutions or our proposed ideas have all been about making sure we don't add additional properties to the district and that we don't suddenly hit you with moving a pole that's a really huge cost or that is costly, $100,000, $200,000, without first advising you of that and your neighbors of that and getting your input back on that. Just a couple final points here I wanted to look at with you, and then I'm going to turn this back over to John to talk to you about streetlights and then take your input. The new above ground equipment, the SCE pad mounted transformer and switch, our PMEs, are represented by these yellow stars. I'm going to show you a picture of what those look like. And then these triangular situations here are where underground vaults would be installed throughout the district. And what we have on this with these underground vaults, I want you to take some consolation in this. The underground vaults, they do have a couple pipes that stick up to supply fresh air, but these vaults are now constructed in such a way. This is not going to be a situation where you have a metal vault cover out here that when a car goes over, it's going to rattle. These are concrete. They have concrete lids on them, and then in the center they'll have a single manhole. So you'll find that these vaults will be, once they're in and we've paved this back, they will be all but innocuous. You won't even know that they're there. They do have to have these two pipes that come up in the sidewalk. You see, that's what the vault access looks like right there. That's what the entryway looks like. And then they have, you can see here, a little bit larger concrete lid that they can lift off if they have to put transformers in and out of that with a crane or a heavy piece of equipment. But once it's established, it pretty much closes over, and you've got the same thing as you have with the sewer manhole. And then on the curb, you have these two vent pipes that go down and supply fresh air to this, cooling and fresh air. These pipes can also be painted Smalaga green, the same color as this pole or as this pedestal here. This is representative of the SCE transformers, again, that would be located in all of the starred areas, or what we call, what the SCE planner calls a switch or a PME, but they're all roughly this size. They're all roughly this size, and I think I guess we don't have a dimension on that, but that is roughly the middle of your thigh, 30 inches high or so. And again, pretty reasonably innocuous. What these contain are all those gray garbage can things that you see now on the poles, those transformers. When they take those down, they have to put them somewhere. And I didn't want Tom to take offense to me referring to his transformers as garbage cans, but that always is the best way. When you say, "Oh yeah, the garbage cans that hang up," but anyhow, that's what has to go in this equipment. And one of the reasons the planner has to plan this out the way he does, as he's expressed to me, is these kind of have to be in the middle of the block. A lot of times they have to be in the middle of the block because he's going to use this transformer and he's going to serve properties in this direction and this direction. If you put that clear down here to the end, then the people down on this end would have less suitable power because of the resistance and the additional wiring that would come down this direction. They would have more resistance in their wiring and subsequently a little bit less voltage than people at this end. So by locating it in the center there, we can pretty balance that out so that nobody is adversely affected in terms of their power supply. So that's what that looks like. Yes, sir. Tom, can you address that? If they're on private property, they have to have an easement on the property, an agreement with the property owner to locate them there. But in a lot of cases, and I'll let Mr. Wagner, the SCE planner, address that. In a lot of cases, I don't know if they can be located in this parkway or not. Tom?
Is this on? They are located for this particular project right behind sidewalk on private property. And that's for a number of issues, primarily traffic safety. As Jim mentioned, we require easements to put equipment on private property. This particular neighborhood does have parkway. So the transformers and the equipment, the pad mount equipment that's similar to the transformers, will be behind sidewalk on private property. All of the flush mounted boxes would go in the parkway itself. And we can talk about that in detail later. Or
This, there we go. That's correct. Here's De La Vina, and this would be State Street. I'm sorry, let me repeat that question. The question was, where these stars are located, what side of the street are they actually located on? Okay? And I believe that the stars pretty much represent what the planner has planned, that they would be on the south side of the street, or the side of the street closest to De La Vina, furthest away from State Street.
yeah.
Except for a couple on the side street. And notice, for example, this one is placed in the mid-block of Quinto, being in, because it has to serve these properties as well as these properties in either direction. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Okay, for all of the people that's going to be watching on television, the question was, again, what side of the street are the transformers on Chapala on? And when I walked the job and looked at the job, and when you walk the street after this meeting, you'll see that on the north side or the mountainside of Chapala, the vast majority of the properties have retaining walls 2 or 3 feet high from the sidewalk. The properties on the other side of the street have no retaining walls, so that's going to affect the cost quite a bit for your project. There's also other obstacles such as water, sewer, gas on one side of the street versus the other. So the most efficient way to serve this project would be to put the trench line and the equipment, the transformers, on the south side, if you will, of Chapala, to avoid all the retaining walls. So that's sure.
Make humming noises, and how about the radiation from the electrical transformers? How safe are those?
The question was the humming, the noise, and the electromagnetic fields. As far as the noise, some make more noise than others. Some are virtually silent. I mean, it is a piece of equipment, and a transformer essentially is 2 coils inside that box that transform the high voltage into your house voltage, your 120, 240 volt that you use in your home. So the coils sometimes vibrate, or they do vibrate. Now, some will make more noise than others. It's a tough question to answer. Some are silent. Some people live next to it or have it in their front yard and they don't hear it. Some people complain of the noise. If they are too noisy, we can replace it and try to get a less noisy one. It's really a personal preference or decision. It's tough to answer. As far as electromagnetic fields, yes, they do emit electromagnetic fields, as do a number of pieces of equipment, electrical equipment or otherwise. Again, that's a personal preference. There is no definitive study to indicate that electromagnetic fields are dangerous. Some studies indicate, some studies do not. Electromagnetic fields really is a function of distance. So the higher or if the further away you are from wires and pieces of electrical equipment, the less magnetic fields you're exposed to. With that in mind, high voltage lines and transformers or garbage cans, if you will, on a pole are 40 or 45 feet away from you. A piece of equipment on the ground is 3 feet away from you. So the ground does not mitigate any fields, so you're going to be closer to this type of equipment when it's on the ground. The other issue is the time you are standing next to or around this piece of equipment. If you're simply passing by it or underneath the power lines, you're really not going to get much exposure to this type of equipment. If you're right next to it hours and hours a day, then you're going to get more exposure. Again, I would encourage you to research that type of situation or studies. We really take no stand on that.
I know the bottom stars all the way to the right. That's on the neighbor next to me. Yes, that one right there. And that box has been shown to me, actually by you, where that would be located, which is 25 feet from his living room. Do you have any idea of what that would cause to him or to my tenants at my house versus it being across the street, down at the corner of Mission, up on a pole 40, 50 feet high?
Well, the question was a function of distance with the first transformer.
Being 25 feet away from that buzz box, from the radiations or whatever can come off of this, versus being up on a pole down at the corner of Mission next to commercial property, being next to right in the middle of two residential properties, 25 feet from the living room.
The gentleman's question was, again, a function of distance away from transformers, pad mount equipment. Again, this is for the folks listening on the web. Again, it's tough. The electromagnetic fields drop off pretty quickly once you get several feet away from it. The question of being 25 feet from the living room of a residence, I couldn't tell you what the fields would be. It's a function of the usage. The power that's being used from that transformer can vary from one transformer to another. There's a
Way to find this out?
well, we can do studies, or we can go out and give you some sort of comparable piece of equipment and distance. But keep in mind that a transformer, again, the power being used from that transformer will affect the field. So if you have a transformer somewhere that's not being used or being used differently than what might be used in the particular location that you mentioned, the fields will be different. So we can give you some sort of comparative, but you really can't tell until it goes in and you actually do the study.
My concern is I remember about it on San Siegel Road there, Montecito School there, where you had transformers there and heavy power lines running over the playground. And when that school district had all those removed from these kids potentially being sick from this problem we're talking about. And now we're saying, well, we had all those removed over at Montecito Union School with the garbage cans up on the poles like you're talking about and the power lines. But now we're gonna set them right 25 feet from people's front roofs. Isn't that the same thing?
Well,
Let me.
no, it's not the same thing because and I don't want to belabor this point because what I'd prefer to do is give you references at SCE. SCE has a management group that addresses these questions and deals with these questions and looks at what the federal government has identified as safe levels, and anything they would be installing would be within those safety parameters that the federal government has established. Okay. But a lot of people have the opinion, as the people at Montecito School, but remember, these wires were running overhead, these were transformers overhead, that you said that they got out of the way. That's what we're doing here. We're taking those wires and transformers down, we're putting them underground. Unfortunately, we can't move them and put them over on De La Vena Street or State Street. They're going to exist here. But again, I think rather than getting hung up on this point, or rather than getting, belaboring this point, what we could do is give you the information from the experts at Southern California Edison. I've worked with this gentleman, and They'll come out and do measurements. They'll look at this. They'll provide you any kind of information you need to assure you that, that what's happening is not hazardous to your health. They would then come out and measure, any levels, and if they found them to be excessive, they would make changes to mitigate them. So, yes. Well,
I actually think that's a really great idea, and if you can offer that, I think that's really wonderful. I just wanted to a couple of little points. I think, we can get a little bit off on a tangent on this, I understand, but I think there's a couple of key differences, I think, because I know a little bit about EMS, but I'm not an expert. One is, Montecito Union School and some of these other lines talk about where they have these high voltage. Those are the higher voltage lines that we're usually talking about, not just the transformers, but 56 kilovolt lines and greater, right, which makes a much bigger difference. And we're not talking about those levels, I don't think. And the other thing is, I think that EMS, when you look at it, I think it comes down like a cone, and it drops off pretty fast. So it's not like the EMFs go straight out laterally towards you. They drop down to ground, I'm pretty sure. So I think those are two pretty important differences as well.
Well, your point about Montecito School, that was an entirely different scenario, but his point is valid, and all that I can really say is that the type of equipment that we're installing in this system is standard equipment. It's being used all over our service territory, and it's nothing that's unusual. The new housing tracks that Edison design the transformers in the front yard essentially the same way that this project is being designed. The footage from living room or the house or whatever is pretty consistent with what we see with new housing tracks or other residential areas in our service territory. So it's really nothing unusual. Again, this is a personal choice that each one of you make as far as a comfort level with this type of equipment being around it, and whatever we really take no position on it. Just we'd encourage you to research and do the fact finding on your own and come up with your own comfort level about this type of equipment.
Excuse me, isn't there a type of EMF shielding available for certain boxes like that? And I know they've done that type of work in large office buildings where people have to sit in cubicles with a lot of electromagnetic fields around. There's a type of shielding that can be available to people.
Well, the question is about EMF shielding, and I think there are certain types of EMF shielding. It really wouldn't be practical to do it around the transformer. Your comment about office buildings, if you really are concerned about this type of EMF situation, you can do some mitigation in your home. You can do studies inside your home as exists today with the overhead lines to see how much EMF exposure that you have right now and try to mitigate those types of fields inside your house. If you want to build some sort of shield around each transformer, I personally have not seen that. They might exist, but it might be cost prohibitive and it might be more aesthetically obtrusive to the situation. So we can look into that, but I personally have not seen it in the Edison system as far as transformers or other types of equipment having shielding around it.
Okay, I'm going to move on. I want to stay on track here, although, as Tom said, those are legitimate concerns, and I can provide, we can stay later to discuss those, or we can provide, again, probably the best resource I know that's available is an actual management group within Southern California Edison that deals with this, has studies, has the instrumentation and the meters to come out and take measurements, to do those kind of things, and can discuss it, can talk to you, specifically about it, and answer the questions on an expert level as opposed to someone, my unstudied lay opinion or someone else's. So, even though Mr. Wagner, of course, would have more expertise in this than probably anyone in the room, I don't think that he would bill himself as an EMF expert. So, and we could have, if that became enough of a neighborhood concern, we could certainly have a separate meeting and have the gentleman in the management group up from SE to discuss that. So, yep. Let me repeat that question, Tom, and then you can answer it. The gentleman asked, what is the proportionality between the existing number of transformers that are currently located in Chapala, the proposed Chapala district, and the number of transformers that would be there after the undergrounding took place?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking. Before I go any further, I want to thank everyone for being here. We do appreciate your interest and your feedback. If you walk down Chapala, you'll essentially see the same. There's a transformer for every block. The only exception, again, this is from memory, and I have a pretty terrible memory. The only exception is the block with American Avenue. There's 2 transformers on that block, one feeding Chapala proper, and then the other one on the corner of Chapala and American feeding American Avenue. As far as the side streets, I think they're pretty much 1-to-1. I couldn't be for certain about that. As Jim said, we tried to put the transformers mid-block, so each of those transformers will feed that particular block, and we put them in the middle for voltage drop concerns because we want to feed both ways. If we wanted to put one transformer on one end of the block, we would have to put another transformer on the other end of the block because we have certain quality parameters that we have to follow when we lay out a job like this. The other concern, or the other thing that we took into account, was we took the petition or the vote for this type of district, and we tried to put the transformers on a property that voted for this type of project.
Okay, we're just about done with this. We're just about done with the presentation here, so let me just move on. That, again, is what the transformer would look like. And then the vent pipes as discussed. This Verizon, represented by Mr. Tom Selman, Verizon is not going to have any additional above-ground equipment. There's nothing above ground that will be located in the district when they do their undergrounding. They do have 2 existing above-ground cabinets that are shown here on Quintos and Los Olivos, and we'll show you a picture of those, that would remain. That is the one on Quintos. Nope, excuse me. That's the one on Los Olivos Street, Chapala proper, and this is Los Olivos over here. And I believe that one is the one on Quinto, right around the corner, and Chapala Street is over here. So those boxes, there'll be no additional equipment offered by Verizon or it's constructed by Verizon. However, those 2 pieces of equipment would stay. And we could probably try to get this one painted. Looks like somebody's been kind enough to cover up the graffiti that was put on it. And then in terms of Cox equipment, and Cox again is represented by Mr. Schwartzberg, by Doug, he has some new above-ground equipment as indicated by the stars. And this would be in these locations. These are these amplifiers, Doug, or amplifiers? And they look like this here. They're very innocuous, 30 inches high, 17 by 18. And again, what happens here when the technicians come out to work on this, the underground circuits rise up in this. You know, they get amplified or modified in any way, you know, dealt with. When they come out, these box lids actually lift straight up. They lift off, and then they can work on all the equipment that's under that. So, and with that, I'm going to pass the mouse back to Mr. Wozniak. Again, I appreciate your patience and attention, and your very thoughtful questions. And again, once we finish with this, we'll take any other comments or questions you may have.
Thank you, Jim. I want to move on to the existing streetlights. As you well know, that there are 2 types of streetlights out there with cobra heads. One is mounted on the existing wooden utility poles that are going to be removed, and there are cobra head fixtures on concrete poles. This slide shows you where there are existing streetlights in the neighborhood on wooden poles. They're represented by the green symbols. And there are a couple, as you know, streetlights on concrete poles with cobra head fixtures, represented by the purple symbols. And so those purple ones potentially could stay, depending on the selection of the new streetlight type for the street, and potentially with ABR review if necessary. What am-
There's a mistake on that last.
okay,
Constant Street, I believe, is also
okay, thank you.
Oh,
there's two constants.
well, at least we're
Okay.
constant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll fix that. I would like to make you aware of a council action earlier this year in February. We have a streetlight design guideline document that was adopted by council. It's approved by council, and it reflects the street lighting issues for the city. Generally, there's a game plan to replace the existing Cobra heads in the city with a new replacement fixture. So the city boards and commissions and the council have raised concerns in the past about the Cobra head style. And again, going back to that Cobra head style, that style it actually shines some light outward, isn't efficient in directing light downward. And so with goals of the streetlight committee that was formed, including representatives from boards and commissions and the city council, the committee put together a document that reflected the goals of street lighting in the city and was approved by the council. And so there are two types of fixtures that are city standard fixtures that could be considered for this project. Some of you may have seen them. There's a fixture like this existing right across the street from this building, and you may have seen them in the Cottage Hospital vicinity and on new projects. It's referred to as the Doma-style fixture, and it can be retrofit on existing concrete poles that exist within the city. And it has an arm on it that extends the fixture from the pole and disseminates the light onto the street, as good street lights do, to give the pedestrians and all modes of transportation some illumination for night vision. And these fixtures have a cutoff fixture that directs the light downward so as to put the light where it's most efficiently spent, and that's towards the ground and the target areas of which to illuminate. And so that is the general fixture of replacing the Cobra head fixture. Another consideration for this neighborhood is there are existing Chapala Street fixtures on Lower Chapala Street, and you see them in the downtown area. And this would be a consideration for your neighborhood as well. We're investigating the cost of this fixture as opposed to the Domus fixture because this is a metal pole. Now, the city owns a mold by which that these can be cast, but we haven't had need to cast new fixtures in a significantly long time, and I don't know if anyone in the city recalls the last time that mold was ever used. Maybe the last time the Chapala fixtures were installed, perhaps, the ones that exist on the street today. But this is an option for the neighborhood to consider, and we'll return with some costing information once we get our arms around costs with these. Initial indications is that they may be somewhat comparable in cost. So we'll confirm that. My guess is that there may be a plus or minus 10, 15, possibly 20% cost difference, but I can't confirm that right now. But I think they're comparable. I'm assuming they're comparable costs. So we've talked with our energy and facilities manager, and he has explained that he would entertain either fixture for the street. He ends up maintaining them after we're done with the project. And so they're both on our city design guidelines list and are candidates for your street. So we'd like to get the neighborhood's input on these two types of fixtures. Any new fixture, that would be a concern with regards to the design guidelines. One of the goals of the streetlight design guidelines for the city was to minimize the number of fixture inventory in the city so that we can be cost effective throughout the city, so that the maintenance people don't have to keep numerous spare parts for various types of fixtures. So we have a limited inventory of streetlight fixtures in the city, the State Street fixture, for example, and there's a Carrillo street fixture in the various fixtures. So the intent is to not create a significant number of additional street fixture types. So what we'll be doing with this issue is that we'll be talking to the neighborhood, and again, as a follow-up to the previous discussion regarding design issues and streetlight issues, we'll be planning to send out information to all within the district boundary as it was approved by council, and to seek input on these design issues and streetlight issues, and we'd like to include that information. And if necessary, we can come out to the neighborhood if you'd like, if there's a desire to hold a neighborhood meeting to help people with more information or elaborate on the information that's provided today. Maybe someone doesn't have a computer where they can access this video, for example. If that's the case, we'd be happy to have staff or Mr. Bridge or our resources come out and talk to people again. But one of the goals is to get the neighborhood feedback so that we would send out a postcard or information packet to every individual property owner. And then we don't always get everyone to respond back, but we would use the information of which we get back and try and take next steps forward and continue to work with the neighborhood on these important issues for us to finalize the design and to take next steps. If appropriate, we'd go to the Architectural Board of Review, the ABR. I would suggest that we would go to the ABR if we were proposing on the Chapala Street fixture. So we'd like to get their input on that. If the neighborhood was simply wanting to select this one, I believe that's just do it, because that is the intended replacement fixture for the Cobra head. And that's in the design guidelines as well. And so with that, I just wanted to add that these are the meter pedestals that would be necessary. Do we have a number or indication of a number, Jim, on the number of meter pedestals?
No, but looking at Cliff Drive, we had to install 2 up there.
Okay, so it's potentially the same distance, and so we envision 2 meter pedestals required for metering the street lights.
That would be on the parkway.
These meter pedestals are installed within the city right-of-way in the parkway. In this case, yeah, it's on the parkway, typically just off the sidewalk. So with that, we conclude our presentation. We do need to resolve the streetlight selection, so we'd like to get input from the neighborhood on that. We'd like to finalize the utility drawings, again, only after we've received neighborhood input. Then we'd like to initiate the finalization of the assessment engineer's report. As Jim mentioned, we've had contact and we've gotten the assessment engineer working again on the project. What the assessment engineer needs to know is where the termination of the overhead lines and underground lines are, those riser poles are, so that she can finalize her draft assessment engineer's report. So once we have conclusion on the design issues, then she will have another meeting in the new year on the assessment engineer's draft report. And we'll have as many meetings with the neighborhood as necessary to continue to work on these issues. So we plan on making significant progress in the new year. We're going to try and make up for some of the time that we've had to take and divert to T-Fire, Institute of Fire, and other priority projects throughout the city. So through that process, there will be a finalization of the district boundaries based on design and assessment engineers' report issues, as Jim has gone into great detail and talked to you about. So again, we'll have as many meetings, public meetings. We can have more formal meetings like this, or we can have neighborhood meetings if that's a desire of the neighborhood. And our goal is to have a postcard straw vote on the pulse of the neighborhood to see if the level of support is where it's at, because the council has previously in other council meetings indicated that they're looking for a strong neighborhood level of support. This neighborhood has demonstrated that strong support in the initial petition that went out to the city council. So the council is looking for continued strong support from the neighborhood. So we would help to talk to neighbors and do what facilitation that we can to foster good communication in the neighborhood. And we realize another important part of the assessment engineer's report is the financing and the cost issues. So we'll have the financing and cost issues discussion as part of the final assessment engineer's report. We'll talk about bonding. We'll bring in the acting finance director from the city of Santa Barbara, to give you the best information that we can so that we can prepare ourselves for a day where we would do a final vote. But there are a couple more steps in the process. We'd have to go back to council to initiate final steps before you get a mail out or you get a opportunity to vote on the final vote of the project. And I just want to remind you all that even if there was a strong, even the council has the final say, is what I'm trying to say. The council, no matter what the outcome of the neighborhood vote, the council does have the final say on the project, whether it moves forward or not. So I think the stronger the support, the more likely the underground utility assessment district would have of succeeding. So again, staff is the facilitator. We'll like to answer any questions you have, take any comments you have, and this is a great time for us to use the microphone for people to come up so that the people watching this video can hear, and then it would save us time and not having to repeat the questions and the comments. So I appreciate if you do have questions and comments, please line up or come up and speak. Please give your name too, please, if you will, please. That would help us. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gail Elback. I have a property on the first block of Chapala, on the 2000 block. And my question is, when you first turn from Mission onto Chapala, there's a major difference between the benefit of this underground utilities. When you go up Chapala, I have walked the block all the way down to Constance, and I can understand that those who desire this project are likely those who have the utilities going through outside of their living room window. Their main view has this, the utilities going through the window. However, when you first turn onto Chapala, you do not. They're overhead utilities like anywhere else. Now, my question is, when you assess, you say so far it's 4.6 million, and likely with the light fixtures and everything else, it's going to go up. You mentioned a benefit assessor. Will that amount not be divided equally among every residence because there's no benefit to underground utilities to the first, at least the first block, maybe the second block, whatever, until you go down, where definitely, or most likely, their property values will go up in value if they can get the utilities out from the front of their living room view windows. So that is my question.
Thank you, Ms. Elbeck. In response to the question, the assessment engineer's job is, and by law, Proposition 218, they're required to conduct their assessment engineer's report proportional to the benefit of the properties. So in answer to your question, will everybody assess the same? Not exactly. While there may not be ocean views in this corridor, there will be issues of removing lines possibly in the front of the house and possibly not on the side of the house. And the assessment engineer likely will, from what we've seen of past assessment engineering reports, is that they will assess proportionally to the benefit. And so it's their job to do that and defend that. And so I don't anticipate that everyone will be, as a matter of fact, there's a strong indication that everyone will not be assessed the same. And so it's a good question as to, at the corner of, say, Mission and Chapala, what will a corner property be assessed? And we'll pursue that with the assessment engineer. But the assessment engineer will bring her to one of the meetings, upcoming meetings, fairly soon in the next month or two. Well, actually, after the new year, a month or two after the new year, and bring her in to explain that in detail with you. And then she would work with individual property owners. We have the same assessment engineer in the Eucalyptus Hill Road Underground Utility Assessment District, and she is working with individual properties in that district, property owners, and explaining those issues to them. So what I'm saying is that it will be It's her job to do it in accordance with the law, and she'll be doing it with our oversight, and that she will have individual meetings if necessary. She'll come and have neighborhood meetings, but she'll have individual meetings as necessary to talk to every individual person that has a question regarding the assessments and how they are appropriately applied.
Do you know who that will be, that person? Or
I have the name of the person. Her name is Joan Cox. She's with Harrison Associates Engineering. It's what she does for a living. She's been doing it for 25 years-ish. She's the underground assessment district guru in the state. And she has done multiple assessment districts in the Bay Area where they have similar issues that we do here in Santa Barbara with regards to views and neighborhood and general assessment versus special assessment. So we feel we have the right person here to help us give you the answers that you're looking for. So without getting into specific individual property assessment discussion, I'd like to offer that we'll have that discussion with her, bring her here to have give her, explain that best to you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
And, I do have one more question, if everybody. It's just the initial petition. I just wanted to comment that in that initial petition, it's important for you to understand and the city council to understand that on that petition, there were no costs involved. Everybody just sign up, let's just see what happens. Now we're to this point where it's getting a little bit worrisome. And I think, I'm hoping that soon there will be a letter out to let people know their costs, so that would be more fair to so many people who did sign that initial petition to know that it isn't for nothing. It's going to be quite a sum. Okay, thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you. In response to that last comment, which is the cost, that is one of our goals, is to give you the best information that we have, and we're trying to do that. But we do need to get utility final design cost estimates at this stage. That's the next step for us once this design effort has reached to this point. So we'll share the information as it becomes available to us.
Hi, I'm Vic Stewart. I have a property on Chapala Street. I have a couple of questions, or maybe a clarification and maybe a comment for the people. If you have a house on a corner and you're going to get a benefit from the front and the side, does that mean your assessment will be greater than somebody with just the frontage?
I believe so.
I believe so. Generally,
And I'm not asking for specific numbers, but in general.
I believe
we
so.
have found that to be the case in Eucalyptus Road. And what the assessment engineer does is, after she has walked the neighborhood, looked at all the poles, and everything, she says, what are the benefits that we're going to base this assessment on? Excuse me.
Yep, here.
Excuse me, the microphone wasn't on. She actually comes out and says, what are the assessments that we're going to base it? Now, she'll decide, is there a view assessment here, or is there a property that has, like, as you indicated, lines in the front and lines to the side? Are they obtaining some kind of additional benefit because they have lines on two parameters removed? But she'll actually make a list of each of these, and then she'll assign a given amount of, like, a half a point to this or a point to that. And then that's how it will be, how she'll make that determination. What she has showed us on Eucalyptus Hill Road is when there was in one situation, there's a private driveway going up, the house has wires removed in the front and on the side. They're paying an extra half point of assessment for the wires being removed on the side. And I might just, in commenting on that to our last speaker, question, because the criteria is established and laid out and defined, and then she applies that to each individual property. And if a property believes that an assessment, one of the criteria has been inappropriately applied to it, she gladly meets with those people and will look at their side of the issue. She's met with me and an individual property owner on Eucalyptus Hill Road and has changed the assessment as a result of the meeting. So there's an objective set of criteria that will be established for this community, and then will be applied to each individual property. And then when you see that, you'll be able to say, well, do I agree that that benefit as it's defined is applicable to my property? So I hope that answers your question in kind of a roundabout way, sir.
The second question was, okay, now you're going to assess $35,000 for each property, whatever it might be. Is that going to affect our property taxes?
I can answer that also. We've actually gone to the county assessor's office and looked at that. And there will be no reassessment of the properties. In fact,
But it's going to improve our property value, so you keep telling us.
Well, it will remove the wires and should increase the property value in terms of enhancing the curb appeal. But we will not have to, for example, obtain a permit for each individual property to make the conversion. And generally, it's the permit process that evokes the subsequent assessor's review. And the reason for that is when Edison comes up, unless you want to do something at your property to change your service panel, make it like maybe you have a 50 amp service panel and you want to change it to a 200 amp panel, or do something of that sort, we'll simply attach to that new service panel right where the meter comes out. They simply lift that meter off, put an adapter behind it that routes to the ground, and then put the meter back on. And with that changeover, they require no permit. Okay, and so subsequently, the assessor's office has never evolved because a permit is never filed and cost for a permit are never incurred.
The second question on the permit issue, for undergrounding from the house to the pole, or the underground pole now, is that going to require a permit?
It will not require a permit from the county or the city. What we would ask is probably a field inspector from either Verizon, Cox, or SCE would want to be sure when you were laying those conduits that the trench was of significant, of the proper depth. And generally what we do is we go down about 42 inches and lay the SCE conduit. And then we come up from that, we put 12 inches of fill or 12 inches of vertical separation. And then we lay the Verizon and Cox conduits up at that height and then provide about 30 inches of cover for those. So with that, it doesn't require a permit, but it would probably require an inspection to be sure that those lines have been installed at proper depth and put together properly.
Okay, and just one other.
Sorry, I can add on to
Sorry.
that, which is if the property owner wanted to make an improvement and upgrade the panel, I believe, Jim, that may require a permit. But as far as this project, just connecting the new underground line to the house wouldn't require the permit, but an upgrade potentially may.
Okay, just one other comment. Having been through this, having to lay an underground from my house to the pole, the cost was about $6,000, and the city had no regard for the fact that I might have had to dug up my driveway, and that cost me extra work to have that done. But the actual cost of the undergrounding was about $6,000. So just to give you some sort of a guesstimate on what that might be cost you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello. I'm June Pujol, 2425 Chapala. First, I just wanted to say thank you all for the attention and work you've been doing. I really appreciate it, and having you all come out here for 2 hours on a weeknight is also really great. I really mean that. I think it's great. I have a technical question and then a process question. So in the technical question, just quickly, if I'm assuming you would replace with wood poles, and for the risers you would also replace with wood poles. Is that right? Because I know that in several areas, and I thought maybe SCE had some sort of a new guideline or program or something where they're putting up either concrete or steel poles. And just to complete that, because then you could probably answer the whole thing at once. If it was a concrete or a steel pole, would you need the same guy wires? Yeah.
We plan on replacing back with wood poles, and they would require guying. If we went with, we don't typically do concrete for distribution, which is what this is for Edison, a distribution system, versus a transmission system, the higher voltage. Concrete is very rare. At one time, or there are times when Edison's put in fiberglass poles, which would require the same guying. Steel poles, they're called lightweight steel poles, they require the same guying issues. There are poles that's called engineered steel poles, which would require no guying, but those are very costly, and they require a very large, deep concrete foundation, and the diameter of those poles are very large. So as far as aesthetics, I don't think anyone would be happy with those sort of engineered poles, and they're not really needed. The guying and the anchoring system for this type of project is very common You have to terminate and rise up, as Jim said. So the best solution are the wood poles.
The riser poles aren't as tall, right, as the regular?
I can't really say that because when you have the overhead wires go straight through on a cross arm, such as you have in this neighborhood, it can be a different distance. As Tom Solomon mentioned and Doug mentioned, the utilities have to have different space requirements when they build a pole. They're very uniform, as you might see, and they're all defined by the rules and regulations that we have to follow. When you dip down with high voltage off a riser pole, you'll see the cables go up the plastic pipe, and there are certain dimensions that we have to be from the overhead wires transitioning to the underground cable. They typically require 5 to 10 foot taller pole. Again, it's all project specific. Sometimes the existing poles are tall enough to accommodate that. Sometimes you need a little bit taller pole to accommodate the space requirements needed.
Okay. And before I ask my process question, I just want to say I think the Chapala light fixtures look beautiful. That's my comment on that. And I think you've done a really great job at trying to be as efficient as possible with some of the kind of change order kind of discussions you brought up today. So it'll be interesting to see how everybody else kind of weighs in on that. Kind of interested to see what it means for everybody. But that kind of gets to the next steps. On the first two bullets, resolve the streetlight selection and finalize the utility designs with neighborhood input. Exactly how is that going to work? Because it seems like that's where we are now, and it doesn't seem like that would take too much time, at least, to accomplish. But how would you see, like, the start and end of that part going? That's my process question.
Thank you. What I envision is, well, one of the factors, maybe I can clarify, is that you may have read in the papers about the city budget, and city has a 2-week furlough starting, the 2 weeks before Christmas. So we only have 2 weeks before that furlough. So what I envision is to have a notification sent out to the public. I'm hoping we can get that out before our furlough so that we can summarize these issues and get that flyer out to the public so that we can start receiving that information back after the new year. Our furlough, I don't recall the date. I know our last city day date the city is open is December 18th, and we open again on January the 4th. And so we'd like to get the information out in the mail before the furlough if possible, and then we would expect to get it back in a timely manner after the new year, and then, based on that information, determine if we need to go to the ABR for the street light or not, and then utilize that information to see if we can finalize the design or have to hold another meeting to discuss key issues if it's not definitive as to what direction that we're going. We were successful in this process with the Eucalyptus Hill Road. We've had termination of pole issues, and we did send out a pole to the neighborhood, and we've got back sufficient information for us to move forward with that design and finalizing that design. So we hope to accomplish the same thing with a mail-out and additional meeting or neighborhood visit if necessary to accomplish that. So we'll evaluate that once we get back the information from once we send out.
So you'd send out a card, and it'd have some place to write in something, and then you'd send that back, but then you'd also take, like, other kinds of comments, email, and things like that?
Correct. I'd envision us getting information out, getting it back, evaluating it to see if we need to meet again or what the next steps can be to finalize that. But soon thereafter, after the utility design is finalized, we'll be meeting definitely with the assessment engineer and bringing those discussions. So I envision us having another meeting sometime likely the end of January, early February, the latest, to take the next steps. Thank you for your questions.
Hello, my name is Melinda Putnam, and I live on Las Rosas Lane. And my question is, would there be a different assessment for our little power line? We don't obviously have the typical large power line going like the one that carries the largest load on Los Olivos. And just curious to know if that is something that's taken into consideration, such a small line going through our street.
Let me see if I can bring up your map with your, I was hoping to get there quicker. I have to toggle back, I'm sorry.
What way are you doing that? Answer
Sure.
questions? As far as timeframes go, once you finalize the design, which is what the city's trying to do and we're trying to do, the utilities will probably take 30 to 60 days to come up with their pricing as far as their cost. I can't speak for Verizon and Cox, of course, but for Edison, once they tell Edison that this is the final design, this is what's going to happen, we will take 30 to 60 days to give them a price. And then they would take the other utilities costs and get costs. So right now you're at the preliminary stage, making minor, major adjustments, if you will, whatever you want to do. The larger the changes, the more time it's going to take to get down to a final design. So this is just the first step in that. Then once they get it together, they'll get the final costs, and I'm sure we'll have another meeting to discuss all of the final costs. It'll be a several-month process from here, I'm sure, before you get some sort of final cost estimate.
Just wanted to see if we're in the right vicinity of your property. It's up in this area.
Yes, the little street there.
This
Right, yes, that's Las Rosas Lane.
Okay.
We have.
I can't definitively answer your question because it's something that the assessment engineer will factor in. Again, the assessment by law, she's required to have her assessments be in direct correlation to the benefit. And so if there is a lesser benefit to a property, there would be a corresponding lesser assessment. And so that's something that we'll be getting into with individual assessments. So if you feel that you do have a lesser benefit, then that's a discussion you'll have to have with the assessment engineer. So my answer is general because it needs to be, because I don't have any specific assessment figures or ratios or points to give to you today.
Okay.
Okay,
I have
thanks.
one more real
Sure.
quick one. On the topic of above-ground beautification systems, the pavers, the contractors that will be doing the paving, we have on Los Olivos near our street a very classic vintage concrete street. And so far we don't have too much of the patchwork effect like so many streets in Santa Barbara do, and unfortunately. So I wanted to know what extent they're going to go to make sure that beautiful old concrete, light-colored street might be replaced the right way. And so far they've done a little bit of work. Someone's done work there, and it looks like it's beginning to start looking patchworky,
So
which is sad.
Yes, when concrete streets are challenging because there's no easy way to patch them. And so with a concrete street that doesn't have a lot of excavation through it, there will definitely be a trench mark where it's near impossible to match the concrete. Although gray concrete with gray concrete is a better match than some types of pavement. One of the things that we're looking at in the city is trying to treat even concrete streets. We've been successful with. I know you may like concrete streets, but we've actually accomplished upgrading or treating concrete streets with a slurry seal, and now it looks like a asphalt concrete street or a pavement, the black pavement street. So if a concrete street got to the point where it was either deteriorated or trenched through, that it was affecting its performance, or it was degraded because of potholes or trenching and the like, there are treatments that we would use. It's very costly to replace a concrete street with concrete. Extremely expensive.
Even in just the patchwork areas?
Even in patchwork, patchwork is a significant cost too. The average cost per square foot, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, the average cost to replace concrete per square foot is about $10 a square foot. The cost for us to slurry seal a street, which is our conventional paving treatment, is about 50 cents a square foot. So as you can see, that's 20 times the difference in cost between replacing concrete and doing a slurry seal treatment on pavement. And so we're trying to do cost-effective treatment on concrete streets. And you may be familiar with the 3 blocks of Carrillo Street from Santa Barbara Street to down towards the junior high school. That is a concrete street which we have slurried, and it looks just like all the other paved roads in town. So we have successfully done that on a significant street, and we could attempt to do that, if it made sense, on a street like this too. So what my answer is that we would, once you cut into a concrete street, it's never the same. And so what we would do is that we would repair that street to the best that we could. If that became problematic, then we'd take the next step and address that pavement with a treatment. And so it may not look concrete after we're done. It's possible. But I can't say that definitively, because what the conventional method of repair is trench through concrete, put concrete back, and you can see examples of that on Gutierrez Street. It's a concrete street. It's had trenching through it, and it's been replaced with patched concrete. Okay. So we'll do the best we can, but again,
so.
it's a matter of cost, and it's a matter of effectiveness too.
It's the beautification aspect that I know the city loves to preserve, the original attractive, functional things. So
part of my answer is that fortunately I'm the streets pavement or the streets capital project manager as well, and I'm well aware of the street pavement and concrete street issues in the city, and so we'll do the best that we can to do what makes sense for the neighborhood and for the city, and to be cost effective.
And so that the neighborhood itself, just those few people on that street might be able to get together, discuss hopefully their input that they may be able to help out with.
That'd be great, and I'd be willing to talk with the neighborhood of the street and to work out potential solutions. Thank you for making me aware of it.
Hi, I'm Alex Peugeot, and I also live in Chapala Street with June. And I have a question on the mortgaging. We have talked about that in the past, and there were a lot of things talked about, but I don't see anything concrete. We're talking about mortgaging this maybe in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. As far as I'm concerned, this is a benefit not just to us, but to a big part of the community, also to our children. And I have no qualms of having leaving a debt to the children, to the people who will actually enjoy this, very much so. So I'd like to know if anything has happened with that, and not just for the main line, but also for the laterals. I mean, we don't have a lateral problem. We're already underground there. But it should be something that should be, as a package to make this thing easier and simpler for most of the residents.
Thanks for bringing that up. That was one of the items that we'll be talking about in future meetings with regards to costs and assessment engineers, assessment costs, et cetera. We've had the benefit of tapping into the former finance director's input. He was well aware of the project. Mr. Pearson has retired recently, but he understood this process very well. He's weighed in on this process, and he's made some recommendations to us, so we've had the benefit of that. We envision that a project of this magnitude would have, the city would bond for the project, and there would be a bonding cost, and we'll get into those levels of detail when we talk more about that. And so with regards to mortgaging, we envision a 20 to 30 year period, mortgaging period. And so details would follow, of course, and we have the city has initiated talks with some consultants regarding bonding. Now, the acting finance director, who is the replacement for Mr. Pearson, we've already had discussions with him as well, and so he is getting up to speed with this project, with this underground assessment district issue, and so he will also be making recommendations. As you know, the bonding or the banking and the financial market has changed significantly since the fall of last year. Yeah. And so, but we're still seeing that as a very viable option, and it's a matter of what rate can we lock into for a long time. That's a big variable, but the city will make a decision on that, and we'll make a commitment. Once the city establishes a maximum ceiling rate, they cannot increase it without having to go back to the assessment district for another vote on it. So it's a challenging issue. We'll get into the details of it, but I'm glad you brought it up because it is something that we'll be working, that we're cognizant of, and that we'll be working and spending a lot of time on to get you, again, all those costs associated with financing, bonding, assessment, and bring that all up, and I'm hoping that we can do that early in the next year. And by early that, I mean probably, my guess is in the February-ish time frame after the design is finalized. But I'm hearing from the utility companies they may need a few months to get their cost estimating to us as well. So as soon as that information can be pulled together, we plan on acting proactively to bring that information back to you in a timely manner. So again, my goal is to get all that information, try and get an indication of the level of support, and get back to council no later than the summer.
Okay. The second question is on the boundary. I think you're on the right track trying to preserve the original boundary. As a matter of fairness, I think we're in the third year. We will probably go into the third year since we kind of started with petitions and talks and so forth. And I think it's unfair to start bringing in more people, that it will come like a surprise and so forth. I think there are two exceptions. One is the issue on Pueblo. I think Pueblo, when it affects only 2 properties, right? It seems like a thing that we as a neighbor should go and approach them and say, well, I'm not sure if it's a plus or minus. I think that we would save some money. It seems to me there's just 1 pole and we bring 2 more people. But I think it's fair to ask them. I think we should do that. The other, and I agree with how you're trying to limit the expansion into the apartments and condominiums. It's not any kind of gerrymandering or discrimination or anything. It's just the matter that there's just so many people, and we approach them. I approached a few of them on Quinton. They didn't seem to have an interest on this. It was not an issue for them. So we probably it's the only way to proceed is try to preserve the boundaries. On the issue of Mission, you're talking about saving $200,000, but you're also talking about dropping several properties. Just 1 property. Okay. Yeah, it's the one I feel a little bit more different, because I think what we're trying to do is to have the concept of a neighborhood, a district. And we think that the district is more important. There's a certain synergy, like all of the district together is much more than the sum of its parts. And that's what these kind of beautification projects mean. So, I mean, maybe it's practical. I would hate to let that thing go, because that would be the beginning. It seems like Mission is such a portal, such a way to get into that neighborhood. The third thing I would like to say is about the Chapala fixture. I think that's a great fixture for us. I think there's a precedent being the Chapala Street. I think that will be well received by the city review boards. And I think it's appropriate, but just for the main line. It just seems like that's not the fixture that you want to put on the side streets. I think there's a light fixture on Quinto and some other ones. I don't know how you deal with that, but it seems like it's a fixture that, design-wise, you want to keep it on Chapala. It makes sense. It's like a historic reference to the other Chapala. So maybe you have to do something else on the other streets. And, well, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Just point of clarification. It might seem like 3 years, but it was February 2008 where Council initiated the Chapala UUAD. So although it may seem like a longer time than it has been, or maybe you're referring to all the legwork that started well before that, and maybe that's what takes it to 3 years. Just so to the public and everybody knows that it was February of 2008 where Council initiated the Chapala UUAD and authorized the hiring of the assessment engineer and the utility companies to do the design. Just for clarification. And I know you've been delayed again. I apologize for any delay due to the work that utility companies and staff has had to respond to with the Hazasuta and T fires. But those were significant delays that affected this project. In some ways, we were still benefiting from the market that we have with regards to we plan, hope to get, if the neighborhood would like us to proceed and get this out to bid, that we would still be able to capture a very good bidding market right now. Would there be any more questions or comments? Seeing none, I want to remind you that this session has been taped and will be available online. Lisa, approximately how long does it take for us to get this online? A couple days, so we're hoping by the end of the week or early next week it'll be online. So it's at www.santabarbara.ca.gov/engineering. So that's the website that you go to. I'm sorry, am I not on? I thought I'm on. So So I conclude this meeting, and thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate your comments, input, and feel free to stay. And if you'd like to talk about your individual property or any issues as a follow-up, I'd be happy to stay for a little bit longer, although it's been a long day. Thank you.